What would you do if, on the happiest day of your life, someone tried to destroy everything you built simply because of who you are? Would you stay calm, or would you fight back? Before we get to the moment that changes everything, let us take one step closer to the scene that starts it all. It was supposed to be a perfect afternoon. Warm sunlight filtered through the old oak tree in Marcus Thorne's backyard, the air rich with the scent of jasmine, grilled shrimp, and champagne. Smooth jazz floated over the lawn while friends laughed, danced, and celebrated the beginning of a new life. Marcus stood on the stone patio with his arm wrapped around his new wife, Lena. Her white dress shimmered softly, her smile bright as hope itself. He kissed the top of her head. "This feels perfect," she whispered. "It is only the beginning," he said, holding her close. For a moment, everything was peace. And then, the peace cracked. A police officer stepped onto the lawn with heavy boots and a rigid posture that cut straight through the celebration. His eyes scanned the guests, not with curiosity, but with judgment, almost hunger. The music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. He marched directly toward Marcus, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "I am getting noise complaints," he said. The tone was not a request. It was an accusation. His eyes moved from Marcus' tailored suit to Lena's dress. A sneer tugged at the corner of his mouth. This is not the kind of neighborhood for this sort of racket. A familiar cold knot tightened in Marcus' stomach. A ghost from old encounters. But he stayed calm. "Officer, this is our wedding reception," he said evenly. "If the music is too loud, we will ask the band to lower it. I am Marcus Thorne. We just moved in." He extended a hand. The officer ignored it completely. "I do not care who you are. You are disturbing the peace. You people need to learn how to behave when you move somewhere like this. You people." The words hit harder than the tone. Lena's fingers tightened around Marcus' arm. The jazz band stopped playing. The breeze rustled the leaves as tension thickened the air. Marcus withdrew his hand slowly. "Officer Miller," he said quietly, reading the nameplate. "We are within the city ordinance. But we will lower the music." Miller gave a short, ugly laugh. "Professional courtesy? What is your profession? Rapper? Drug dealer?" A gasp rippled across the guests. "That is out of line," Lena snapped, her voice trembling. Miller glared at her. "Ma'am, stay out of police business." "This is not police business," Marcus said. "This is harassment. And for the record, I am law enforcement. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Supervisory Special Agent." He did not raise a badge. He did not need to. But Miller's face twisted with disbelief. "FBI? Sure. And I am the president." He dismissed Marcus entirely. Not because he doubted the title, but because he could not imagine a black man holding it. And from the shade of the oak tree, two silent witnesses stepped forward. Police Chief Frank Reynolds and Mayor David Collins. They had seen every second. The calm after the confrontation lasted only a heartbeat. Officer Miller's expression twisted, the last shred of restraint burning away. His hand dropped to his baton with a sharp metallic click that cut through the silent backyard like a warning shot. "You think you can threaten me?" he growled, stepping forward with a wild glare. "You come into my neighborhood with your loud jungle music, and you think you can talk back?" Marcus instinctively moved Lena behind him, shielding her with his body. His mind split into two tracks. One stayed human, shaken, outraged. The other switched into federal agent mode, scanning for risks, witnesses, angles, consequences. But Miller did not go for Marcus. He went for the symbol of the entire celebration. With a roar, he swung the baton down on the 7-tier wedding cake. The impact exploded in a spray of buttercream and sponge, white frosting flying across the patio like shrapnel. Gasps erupted from every corner of the yard. The officer kept going. He smashed the tower of champagne glasses, shards scattering like falling ice. He swung again, crushing wrapped gifts, splintering boxes, ripping apart delicate decorations with a violent, hateful rhythm. Lena's scream broke through the chaos. This was not random destruction. This was humiliation. This was punishment. This was the physical form of the words "you people." Marcus stood frozen for a fraction of a second, stunned by the brutality. Then training took over. His mind sharpened, cold and precise, recording each detail. Time, 3:47 in the afternoon. Weapon, standard police baton. Actions, deliberate destruction of private property. Motivation, explicit racial animus. He watched, jaw tight, every muscle locked. There would be time for anger later. Now was time for evidence. Miller finally stopped, chest heaving, sweat and frosting dripping from the baton. He turned back toward Marcus with a triumphant, twisted smile, as if he had restored order rather than destroyed a wedding. He had no idea he had just ended his career. Then a voice rang out. Steady. Commanding. That is enough, Officer Miller. Miller spun around, startled. Two men stepped forward from beneath the oak tree. Frank Reynolds, Chief of Police. David Collins, Mayor of the city. Their faces were stone. Miller blinked at them, confused, desperate. Who are you supposed to be? Another one of his rich friends? Reynolds stepped closer, voice low and cold. No. I am your boss. The color drained from Miller's face. Before he could speak, the mayor stepped beside the chief. And I am Mayor Collins. We were invited here today to celebrate the wedding of our friend, Special Agent Thorne. The baton slipped from Miller's hand, clattering on the stone patio. In that moment, he understood. The man he insulted. The man he mocked. The man whose wedding he destroyed. He was exactly who he said he was. A federal agent. A respected figure. A friend of the two most powerful men in the city. Everything inside Miller collapsed. Reynolds stepped behind him. Hand me your cuffs, he said. Miller stammered excuses, voice cracking, but the chief cut him off. You acted on pure prejudice, Reynolds said. You disgraced the badge. Seconds later, the sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the destroyed backyard. Miller's own cuffs. On his own wrists. And the guests watched in stunned, breathless silence as the officer who had tried to tear them down was led away, broken, terrified, undone by the very justice he thought he controlled. The pristine Oak Creek precinct was a world away from the chaos that had exploded in Marcus Thorne's backyard. Under the cold glare of fluorescent lights, the next chapter of the disaster was already unfolding. Officer Miller, stripped of badge and weapon, sat hunched in an interrogation room. His shock had shifted into a bitter, simmering resentment. But he would not be alone for long. His allies were already moving. Sergeant Bill O'Connell stormed through the booking area with the fury of a man convinced the world had wronged him. A relic of another era, he slammed his hand onto the counter in front of a young booking officer. What is this supposed to be? O'Connell barked. Arresting one of our own because some loud, obnoxious party complained? Sergeant, the young officer replied carefully, the arrest was made by Chief Reynolds. The mayor was a witness. It barely slowed O'Connell. Doesn't matter. There are two sides to every story. Miller felt threatened. The homeowner, this Thorne guy, was hostile, aggressive. I know how these situations go. He was already building the lie. Already shaping the narrative. He turned to another officer, Peterson, a loyal crony. Call the union rep, now. We need to get ahead of this. Inside the interrogation room, the union representative Don Kramer was already leaning close to Miller. His tone was snake-soft, calculated. Listen, Dave, he murmured. You say nothing. You feared for your life. The homeowner made an aggressive move. You saw something shiny, maybe a weapon. You responded according to training to neutralize a threat. Miller blinked. I smashed a cake, he whispered, the absurdity finally cracking through the fog. And some gifts. Sure, Kramer said smoothly. Collateral damage in a fast-moving, high-threat situation. He waved a hand dismissively. We will paint a picture. That noise, that music, was disorienting. The crowd was hostile. And Thorne? He is an outsider. If he has even one complaint in his past, one parking ticket, we use it. We twist it. We muddy the waters. This was the dark art they had perfected. The art of turning victims into aggressors. Across the building, O'Connell and Peterson began typing the official incident report. Their fingers flew over the keyboard, weaving lies into protocol. Subject displayed aggressive body language, O'Connell dictated. Refused lawful commands to lower the volume. Add that he made furtive movements toward his waistband, Peterson added. That one always works. O'Connell grinned. Good. And put that the crowd was becoming hostile. Officer feared for his safety. Click. Click. Lie after lie. They were constructing a fortress of deceit, brick by brick, confident the system would protect them as it always had. They had no idea that for the first time in their careers, the truth was stronger than the blue wall they trusted. And Marcus Thorne, along with the chief, the mayor, and an entire federal agency, was about to bring that wall crashing down. Back at the Thorne residence, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the ruined backyard. The joy of the celebration had evaporated, replaced by the grim resolve of people preparing for battle. The jazz musicians had gone home. Most guests had quietly slipped away. A catering crew worked silently, scraping frosting from stones and sweeping glass that glittered like fallen stars. At a small patio table untouched by the chaos, Marcus, Lena, Chief Reynolds, and Mayor Collins sat with steaming mugs of black coffee. This was no longer a wedding reception. This was a war room. Chief Reynolds exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. They are already trying to spin it, he said bitterly. O'Connell and the Union are building their narrative. They are claiming Miller felt threatened. That you were the aggressor. Marcus nodded slowly. That is the classic playbook. I knew they would try. But they will not win. Mayor Collins set his cup down with a sharp tap. They have no idea what they have unleashed, he said. They did not just assault a citizen. They assaulted a federal agent. In front of the chief. And the mayor. This is no longer a simple misconduct case. This is a declaration of war against the rule of law. Lena spoke then, her voice steady, eyes cold with resolve. Going after Miller is not enough. He is not the disease. He is a symptom. The real problem is the culture that protected him. The people who told him he could do this and walk away. Marcus looked at her with pride. She was right. She is absolutely right, he said. This has to be a multi-front strategy. He turned to the chief. Frank, you take the internal and criminal angle. Suspend O'Connell immediately for filing a false report. Pull every use of force complaint against Miller. Every one O'Connell ever signed off on. Build a pattern. Reynolds nodded, already typing notes. Done. And I will request the district attorney file the strongest charges possible. Assault with a deadly weapon. Destruction of property. Misconduct. Hate crime enhancements. Then Marcus looked at the mayor. David, we need the political front. Go public. Hold a press conference first thing tomorrow. Control the narrative before the union poisons it. Oh, I will do more than that, Collins said, eyes glinting. I am formally inviting the Department of Justice to open a pattern or practice investigation into the entire police department. Top to bottom. Finally, Marcus straightened, his voice turning into cold steel. And I will take the federal front. I am opening a federal civil rights investigation. Subpoenas. Email records. Union communications. We will expose everything. The table fell silent. They weren't just seeking justice for a ruined wedding. They were preparing to dismantle an entire corrupt system. And Marcus, disciplined, calm, relentless, was ready to lead the charge. They had kicked down the wrong door. They had provoked the wrong man. And he would not rest until the entire rotten structure collapsed. The next morning, the FBI field office moved with a quiet, relentless purpose. Agents passed each other with clipped nods, printers hummed, and the glow of monitors illuminated focused faces. A federal investigation was already in motion before dawn. Marcus Thorne, dressed in a sharp dark suit, sat in his glass-walled office. Yesterday's wedding, or what should have been a wedding, felt like a distant bruise. Instead, his mind was set on the mission. Agent Davis, the team's top tech analyst, entered with a tablet. The subpoenas went out 1 hour ago, she said. We demanded Miller's personnel files, training documents, and every complaint ever filed against him. We also subpoenaed all internal communications from Sergeant O'Connell's division for the last 2 days. Good, Marcus replied, eyes fixed on a monitor filled with Miller's service record. I want to see everything. Who he talks to. Who shields him. Who benefits. Minutes later, the data began flooding in, and the truth was uglier than anyone expected. Miller's public record was clean. A few routine commendations. Neutral performance reviews. But the sealed internal affairs folder, accessed only through federal authority, told a very different story. 17 complaints in 12 years. 9 for excessive force. 5 for harassment or verbal abuse. 3 explicitly for racial profiling. The pattern was unmistakable. Every complaint followed the same script. A citizen, often a person of color, reported misconduct. Miller wrote a report painting the citizen as aggressive. His supervisor O'Connell conducted a review that consisted of interviewing only fellow officers. The complaint was dismissed. Case closed. Over and over. It is a factory for exoneration, Marcus murmured. He opened a complaint from 3 years prior. A young black man pulled over for a broken taillight. His car was illegally searched. When he questioned the search, Miller slammed him against the hood, injuring his shoulder. The complaint was dismissed because the victim had a minor juvenile offense on record, deemed unreliable. Cold anger burned in Marcus' chest. Cross-reference these complainants with the civil suit database, he ordered. The results hit like a hammer. 6 of the complainants had attempted to sue. Every one was fought aggressively by the city attorney's office, with help from the police union. The city paid large sums in legal fees just to discredit victims, often settling for small amounts with non-disclosure agreements. It was cheaper to buy silence than discipline a problem officer. But then came the true bombshell. Agent Davis flagged an email chain between Union Rep Don Kramer and O'Connell about another excessive force complaint from last year. Kramer wrote, "This one is messy. Witness present. Make sure reports match. Emphasize suspect's erratic behavior. I will handle the witness." O'Connell replied, "Reports already aligned. Witness will not be a problem." Marcus leaned back slowly. The fury inside him turned cold, controlled, razor-sharp. This was no longer about a bad cop. This was conspiracy. Deliberate obstruction. A criminal enterprise operating inside the department. And now the FBI had undeniable proof. Marcus looked at his team. "We are going to burn this entire rotten structure down," he said quietly. "Every piece of it." City Hall's press room overflowed. Cameras lined every wall. Reporters packed the aisles, whispering urgently. The story had spread across the country overnight. A federal agent's wedding destroyed by a rogue cop. A police chief and a mayor as witnesses. The city was holding its breath. At exactly 10 o'clock, Mayor David Collins and Chief Frank Reynolds stepped up to the podium. Their faces were grave, determined. 2 men who had looked directly into their city's failures and refused to hide. Mayor Collins began. "Good morning," he said, voice steady and resonant. "I will not soften the truth. What happened at the home of Special Agent Marcus Thorne and his wife Lena was not an isolated incident. It was the symptom of a disease that we have ignored for too long." A ripple of shock moved across the room. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, Officer David Miller has been suspended without pay," Collins continued. "But that is only the beginning." He paused. "I have formally invited the United States Department of Justice to conduct a full, independent pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department." Gasps erupted. Reporters shot to their feet. A city inviting federal oversight was rare. Radical. A public admission of systemic failure. Then Chief Reynolds approached the microphone. "As Chief of Police, the integrity of this department is my responsibility," he said. His voice trembled with restrained emotion. "And I have failed in that responsibility." He lifted a thick file. "This is Officer Miller's internal affairs history. 17 complaints. All dismissed. And we now have evidence that his supervisor and the police union coordinated efforts to fabricate reports, intimidate witnesses, and obstruct justice." Reynolds' voice hardened. "As of this morning, Sergeant Bill O'Connell has been suspended and is under criminal investigation for falsifying documents and obstructing justice." The room exploded with questions, but Reynolds raised a hand. "We are implementing sweeping reforms," he said. "Effective immediately. A fully independent civilian review board with subpoena power. New use of force policies prioritizing de-escalation. Zero tolerance for false reporting." He turned toward the cameras. "To Special Agent Thorne and Dr. Lena Thorne, I offer my deepest apologies. What happened to you is unforgivable. But it will not be in vain. It will spark real reform. Real accountability. He stepped back. No questions taken. No spin. This was not damage control. This was a purge. A message to every officer, every union rep, every city employee. The era of impunity was over. The city had chosen a side. And for the first time in years, it was the side of justice. 6 months later, the courtroom felt strangely quiet. No dramatic showdown. No long testimonies. No explosive trial. There was no need. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses. Emails. Subpoenaed records. A federal investigation. And the damning truth of a corrupted system laid bare. David Miller took a plea deal. Sergeant O'Connell took a plea deal. Union Representative Don Kramer took one too. Miller received 5 years in state prison for assault, destruction of property, and official misconduct. O'Connell received 3 years for obstruction. Kramer was disbarred and sentenced to 2 years of probation. The legal war was over. Marcus and Lena's civil suit wrapped up quietly. They were issued a check for $50,000. A number that felt almost hollow. How do you put a price on the desecration of a wedding day, or the violation of a sanctuary that was supposed to be their new beginning? Still, justice, cold, procedural justice, had been served. Late autumn sunlight filtered softly across their backyard. The grass was green again. A new stone patio had been built. The destruction erased, but not forgotten. Lena knelt near the fence, pressing jasmine vines into fresh soil. Marcus watched her, the warm air carrying the faint scent of earth and hope. They could have moved away. They could have left Oak Creek behind. But no. They chose to stay. They chose to reclaim their home. The $50,000 from the settlement had been donated entirely to a nonprofit that provided legal aid for victims of police misconduct. It was their way of turning something ugly into something meaningful. Do you think we will ever forget it? Lena asked softly, her hands buried in the soil. She did not look up. Marcus knelt beside her, picking up a small shovel. No, he said honestly. But we do not need to forget. We just need to make sure it does not define this place. He looked at their home. Not the symbol of success it once was, but something stronger. A symbol of resilience. They had faced hate in their own backyard and still chosen to stand. Their love, shaken but not broken, had emerged deeper, steadier, forged by fire. The quiet life they dreamed of was beginning to return, piece by piece. Their victory was not loud. It was not triumphant. It lived in the simple act of planting flowers together under the autumn sun. It lived in the knowledge that they had fought for something greater than themselves. They had fought for dignity. For justice. For the belief that a home should be a haven, not a battlefield. And now, after everything, peace, real peace, felt possible again. They continued planting in silence for a moment, the quiet comfortable now rather than heavy. The vines curled gently around the wooden slats of the fence, small symbols of new beginnings. Funny, Lena said after a while, her voice soft. When we first moved in, I kept thinking about how perfect this place was. Marcus smiled faintly. It still can be. Just in a different way. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and for a moment, everything felt still. Whole. Safe. What had happened was painful. Traumatic. Infuriating. But it had also sparked change far beyond their backyard. In the months that followed the investigation, reform swept through the Oak Creek Police Department. Officers received new training. Old cases were reopened. Complaints once ignored were reevaluated. Supervisors who had turned blind eyes were reassigned or disciplined. The Civilian Review Board held hearings that made history. Citizens who had once felt powerless now had a voice. And for the first time in decades, the department's leadership looked like the community it served. The ripple effect spread across the city. Journalists followed the story. Law schools taught it. Advocacy groups cited it. Victims of past misconduct stepped forward with newfound courage. Change did not erase the wound. But it brought meaning to it. One afternoon, while Marcus was reviewing documents for another federal case, he found himself staring out the window toward the old oak tree. The same tree that had watched over the joy of their wedding morning. And the horror that followed. He walked outside, standing beneath its branches. Sunlight filtered down in soft beams. The air felt quiet. Settled. This house, he whispered, is still ours. He remembered every second of that day. The fury. The humiliation. The destruction. But he also remembered who had stood with them: Lena, the mayor, the chief, their friends, complete strangers who reached out afterward. The ugliness had been real. But so had the strength. A moment later, he felt Lena's hand slip into his. "Thinking about that day?" she asked. Marcus nodded. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It changed us. But it did not break us." "No," he said softly. "It didn't." The jasmine vines they planted months earlier were beginning to bloom. Small white flowers, bright against the fence, delicate but persistent, growing despite everything. Their home was once again a sanctuary. A place rebuilt not just with stone and soil, but with courage, truth, and the refusal to let hate define them. Their story did not end with destruction. It ended with healing. With growth. With a quiet victory stronger than any courtroom result. And in the fading light of that peaceful evening, Marcus and Lena stood together under the oak tree, knowing that justice is not only about punishment. It is about rebuilding. Restoring. Becoming whole again. And in that moment, surrounded by the peace they had reclaimed, they finally were.